Okay, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this month's Black History Series presentation titled Celebrating Black Canadian History with Lezlie Harper of Niagara Bound Tours. Lezlie founded Niagara Bound Tours in 2004. As a 5+ Black Canadian, she has gained great pride in her ancestral history since starting this journey. She celebrates those that came before in the hopes that those that are here now and those in the future will be inspired when hearing these stories. That although having great challenges, these people were able to rise above, always moving forward with faith, strength, and determination. Thank you for that lovely bio, Lezlie, as well. We are very excited to hear Leslie's presentation today, and we hope that you enjoy. While she is presenting, if everyone could please mic or mute their microphone and turn off their camera so that it's not a distraction. Following Leslie's presentation, there will also be a Q&A period, so that just type in your questions in the comment section and I will read them to Lezlie, or you can also raise your hand and I'll call on you as well. At this point, you're welcome to turn on your mic and your camera as well. One final note, if you would like to support programming such as the Black History Series from the Amherstburg Freedom Museum, you can go to our website and make a donation. It's amherstburgfreedom.org. So I'm going to now turn it over to Lezlie. Thank you so much for being here today with us.
Oh, Lorene, thank you so much for having me. And I really want to publicly say how much I appreciate everything that the Amherstburg Museum does in preserving and keeping Black history throughout Canada, in particular in your area, alive, and informing people and telling them what a wonderful group of people that used to be there and that we're the legacy of today to keep moving forward. It's just terrific. I apologize. I have to apologize if I go off a little bit. I have COVID. I came back from a business trip last week. So if I sound a little bit off, that's why. And so I'll apologize right now, just so you don't think I'm a nut bar or something. But I am really happy to be here today, and I'm going to do my best. But I do encourage questions with every tour I ever do. The only way we're going to rise above our challenges is if we can talk openly about our concerns and our issues. So I encourage you to please ask me questions, ask me anything. I'm here to answer those questions without judgment or any kind of divisiveness. We need to talk. So without any further ado, I'll go on to the first picture. The first picture is of my family, a lot of members of my family at a family wedding. And I'm guessing this was 1928 because the little baby at the top of the picture in the back row there with my Uncle Jim is my mother. And
Lezlie,
she would have been about 2 years old. And
I'm
then the
not.
other very pretty lady was my mom, my grandma. And the man behind her was the unhappy groom, my Uncle Roy, and his wife Alice at the time. And then there's many other of my relatives gathered throughout. As you look at this group of people, what they had gone through
Lezlie,
and what they continue. Yes.
so sorry, I'm not seeing the next image. Do you mind clicking to the next image?
I
Are you
did.
able,
I'm
maybe click on
you're
it
not
with your
seeing.
mouse? Maybe
That's how
click
I
on
did
the,
it.
maybe use
So
your
you're
arrow
seeing
then?
the first one
Yeah, just the logo from the front.
and you're not getting the second one.
No. So maybe
Oh,
try clicking on with your mouse, clicking on the actual PowerPoint to the next slide. Is that how you did it before?
no.
Okay, try that.
How's that? Wait, just a sec. Let me go back. Oh dear, I wonder what the problem is. Now? Did it work now?
No, I'm not seeing it now.
Oh dear. None of it?
Still can see the Niagara Bound Tours.
Isn't that strange? I'm not sure. How about I come out of it and go back in?
Okay.
You want me to
And
stop sharing?
someone has suggested use slideshow mode. Maybe try that.
Where's slideshow mode?
If you look down in the bottom right-hand corner of your PowerPoint, there's a little symbol that looks kind of like a lantern. It's a box on top with a stick coming out of it. If you click that, it should start putting you into a mode where you can advance your slides.
I don't have that there. I don't have
Okay.
it.
The
I'm
other
going
way,
to come out and go back in, I think.
Oh, I see it now.
Send in,
I can see it now.
pardon?
I can see it
See
now.
what?
The
oh,
picture that you're talking about.
yeah, we're on
The
slide
family
2.
picture?
The family picture. Yep, I can see it now.
Really?
So whatever you
Wow.
just did, you can keep doing that, I guess, to
Okay.
prompt the next slide. Okay,
Okay.
sorry
As
to
long as
interrupt you.
no worries. I'm glad that we got that straightened out. So I'll repeat myself quickly. This is a family wedding. The baby at the top of the picture is my mother. She was about 2 years old. So I'm guessing the picture was around 1928 or what have you in Fort Erie, where our old homestead was at Gilmore Road and Thompson Road, if you're familiar with Fort Erie at all. My grandma's in the picture. Some of my other great uncles are in the picture and great aunts. But this was a family that I honor. These are the people I honor, what they had seen, what they had gone through. My grandma and her brothers and sisters had actually seen the eyes and had known the enslaved person that I'm a descendant of. And so they were that close to that they were that close to slavery days, many of the people in this picture, but they did the best they could. They were Canadians. I like to always say they were Canadians. They knew no other country. Canada had given them freedom, and that's what they chose to always call one another. And just for namesake, when people ask me what I am, I'm a Canadian of African descent diluted, because there's a lot of pieces and parts to my background which I may get to as I go forward with the talk today. But I honor these people. They weren't treated well at times. They were treated well at other times, but they chose to continue to move forward, and that's what it's all about. And that's who we are all about. Moving on to the next slide. Can you see it now, Lorraine?
I sure
Lorraine?
can. I sure can. It
Oh,
looks
good.
great.
Oh, good. Well, this is one of my favorite sites. This is the Niagara waterway is the Niagara River. The tour, when I first started doing the tours in 2004, it was called the Crossing Point Tour, because as freedom seekers, we crossed that river psychologically, emotionally, physically, many ways into freedom. On the other side of the water is Buffalo, New York, which is known as Black Rock. In those days, it was known as Black Rock, now called Buffalo. Before the Peace Bridge was built in 1927, the only way to cross over was by ferry boat. There were many ferry landings along the Niagara River in Fort Erie up to the mouth of Lake Erie. And so you'd had boats going back and forth, back and forth. And that's where many people would have first felt freedom. After the Fugitive Slave Act, when the laws regarding slavery were even stricter than they had been in the previous past in the US South, they now affected the free states of the North. This area became quite busy with people crossing over. Accurate numbers, we really don't know. There's been all kinds of estimations. Over the years I've been doing tours, I've heard anywhere between 40 and 100,000. Are we okay there? Okay.
Sorry, the
Anyway,
person who just entered didn't have their mic off. Sorry, I just muted them,
okay.
so you're good.
Okay, I just want to make sure. All right, so anyway, I've had many people cross into this area, and I'll show you all the various crossing points that have existed here. And the one that we're looking at is the Forsyth Landing. Yep, the Forsyth Landing. So one of the more famous people who crossed, there's many people who crossed over. I'm just going to share one of them because of the commonality we have with Southwestern Ontario. And that person is Josiah Henson. Very simple rock has been placed here in commemoration of his crossing into Canada. And I'll just share something a few years ago, quite a few years ago now. Fort Erie at one time was going to put up a huge romanticized, mythologized statue. A woman looking longingly at Buffalo with a pregnant belly, looking back at Buffalo, and her husband looking eagerly at Canada with his lantern flashing in a boat from the 1850s. And at the time, I objected to it because it was mythologized, romanticized, and it totally left out Josiah Henson or any of the other famous people that we may have had crossing in. So there's a woman in Fort Erie that came up with a great idea, and I hope this happens someday. She had suggested, and I love the idea, we have the 1851 and 1861 census of who was here, and I think it would be lovely if we had the wall of names up so that when the brothers and sisters from the US are doing their genealogy and find out they have relatives in Canada, they just might find their relative's name on that wall. And it could be a very simple plexiglass, tough plexiglass wall that people could come and do their rubbings and get their family names off. That's the project I would like to see there, because coming from Fort Erie, a very humble people, that that little rock that shows that people came here is really what the people from Fort Erie were like, the people that I'm a descendant of. I don't speak for all of Niagara, I speak for the people from my hometown. And very humble people, very faith-based, very simple. I sometimes will tell people that when Josiah Henson, I'll move on to that now, picture of our famous Josiah, Uncle Tom, when he came, when my family came to Fort Erie, uh, and Josiah came, when he wanted to establish his segregated community, I used to think, why didn't he settle in Fort Erie? And I realized that the people I come from were quite simple, agriculture, labor-minded people, very much faith-based. But I have a slogan for them. When they came to Canada, it was, we're here, we's free, we's done. Meaning they just wanted a simple life of freedom in this country called Canada. And we're always grateful that the country was available to them to come to. Not like it was an easy trip, as many of you know. On the tour, I go into the full story of Josiah Henson, and but briefly his story. The man in the book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was a fictitious character modeled after the true person, Josiah Henson. Somewhere in history, the term Uncle Tom became a derogatory term, primarily among blacks calling each other names, when the character in the book didn't deserve to be his name to be used in a derogatory term, nor should Josiah Henson's nickname be characterized that way. Both men, whether it be in the book, loved, loyal to family, trusted, faith-based, both wonderful, wonderful men. One of the things that people don't seem to realize, when Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote that book in 1852, it was the first book written about slavery during slave time. And I equate it to the awareness that was produced by that book on slavery, the same as the tragic death of George Floyd did to awaken people's minds to racism. So another reason why taking Uncle Tom out of the narrative isn't necessary. It was over 300,000 copies, I believe, were sold, and it was read around the world. People finally got it. And that's what happened to Harriet Beecher Stowe. She knew about slavery, of course, but when she actually went to a slave market, that's when she had her aha moment. So to take it out of the narrative, it doesn't make sense to me. And I've been to the Josiah Henson Visitor Center in Rockville, Maryland. I was down there in November, and they were rather surprised to hear that the name had changed as well. But Josiah Henson is someone to be very proud of. And when you hear his full story, it's a story that at the end of it, I will say to my visitors, if you want to call me an Uncle Tom, please go ahead, because I wear it as a badge of honor. You're so fortunate to have the museum up in your area, and I send people up to you all the time. As a matter of fact, I'm looking forward to going back there myself soon, one of these days. So this is a closer picture of what's on that plaque. But through everything he went through and what he endured, seeing what happened to his father when he was 5 years old, and being beaten and the broken shoulder blades, and the fact that the one thing that I was always amazed at when he moved the people from Maryland to Kentucky, I never really understood, why didn't those people mutiny? And that's when I realized that we have to look at this history, any history, during the time period that it's being accounted for. And in those days, by the time Josiah Henson, being the kind of man he was, um, and being loyal and trustworthy and faith driven, had nothing to do with being beholden to the white man. That's who he was. But even if you were, people had been enslaved for over 200 years by that point in time. It was almost like the Stockholm syndrome. And he wasn't going to run away. He was purchasing his freedom. So he was staying loyal to the agreement he had with his massa. And the people that he was moving, they didn't mutiny on him because he, Josiah Henson was a good, and then Uncle Tom was a good man. So why would they run away? They knew that they could be safe with him, that he would provide food for them, so they'd follow him. I read a book years ago, a woman who lived in Cambridge, where Harriet Tubman was from, and she wanted the Confederate Army to win the Civil War. Well, when I read that, I thought, this woman's a nut bar. There I am with my 21st century brain. No, she wasn't a nut bar. She, again, people have been enslaved for over 200 years, and she felt that Black people had been born to be enslaved. Well, if that's all you ever knew, then why wouldn't you? One more thing to the Uncle Tom um, cabin book. I read the book when I was young, and Topsy disturbed me because she acted so foolish, and I really didn't like her. But I have to tell you, when I read the book again as an adult, I cried. Because do you realize Topsy in the book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, never realized that she could have a mother or a father? She really had been produced to be an enslaved child. That is so sad, what we've gone through and how we've managed to survive. Even Topsy managed to survive in that book, and as did many in real life. So that's part of what I wanted to say. And the next thing, if someone has questions, I'm happy to answer as we're going through, if that's easier, Lorraine, or do you want to just ask me all of them at the end?
Oh, they can ask along the way. That's fine.
Are there any there now?
I do not see any questions yet. No, I'll let you know if any pop up.
Okay, good. I'm just hoping I'm clear enough on what I'm saying with this virus that I have. Anyway, at the time that Black history was discovered in Fort Erie, a man by the name of Don Thomas, who worked with a woman by the name of Wilma Morrison, who many of you would know. It's just around the anniversary of her passing. I believe it happened on the 20th or 21st of April, 2020. So it's very timely to be doing something with regards to Niagara Black history, since I always considered Wilma to be the matriarch of Black history in Niagara. But she and Don Thomas were the two that were out of the gate and out there trying to get us all involved in Black history. And to be honest with you, at the time they wanted me to participate, I was living in Toronto at the time, and I just did not get it. I didn't get it. I didn't understand. And I could kick myself for that for sure. But Don went around and he built these running man symbols. And there's been some controversy since about whether the symbol of the Underground Railroad should be a running man, because if you're running away, that's the last person that you would want to look like. And I understand that for sure. But we've had some incredible stories about people's escapes that came to Canada. Henry Box Brown eventually came to Canada. The Gateses, that she was a very light-skinned Black woman who could pass for white, and her husband was dark, so she shaved her head, claimed to have a throat issue so she wouldn't be able to talk, and she appeared as the master, and her husband was her enslaved. And they traveled, stayed at hotels, ate in restaurants. Can you imagine being able to pull something like that off? Just tremendous strength of character and determination to make it to freedom by not just them, but so many others. I just think I'm so proud. I often will say I'm proud to be a descendant of a slave, which a lot of people will gasp at and wonder what I'm talking about. But I just think it's so important that, yeah, these people went through a terrible time in life. And yes, we still have our challenges today, but it's so, so important to celebrate the people that we are the legacy of, because my goodness, what a legacy we come from. So anyway, there's a controversy about the Running Man, and they were located throughout the Niagara region, showing various Underground Railroad sites. You don't see them anymore. I should go out and see if there are any left, but I haven't. I don't know what happened to all of them. I know some of them have ended up in museums and whatnot, but I'm not sure what happened to all of them. In the background of this picture, you'll see a bridge. That's over the old Erie Canal. So some people were really fortunate to be able to travel the Erie Canal to this border and then come across. There's a whole Underground Railroad of waterway situations that existed. Talking about Underground Railroad, I need to go back a little bit. When I first started doing these tours, I thought for sure everybody knew what the Underground Railroad was. And I thought for sure Americans would know what the Underground Railroad was. So it was always surprising to me that people thought it was a series of tunnels. I absolutely thought the same thing when I was growing up, that it was a series of tunnels. As a matter of fact, I knew the term Underground Railroad from, I don't remember a time I didn't know the term. I knew it my entire life. And when I reached a certain age, I asked my family, were we part of the Underground Railroad? And the response at that time was, never mind that, you're here now. In my era, you just never talked back or asked a question twice or moaned or groaned. That's the way it was. And I theorized that it could have been, like I said earlier, some of the people in the first picture had actually looked into the eyes of a person who had formerly been enslaved. So it was still too new and too fresh. Or they did come up the secret route, so it was a secret. And I should tell you, when Fort Erie started to explore its Black history in 1975, I went to my Uncle Kip, my grandma's brother, and I asked him as an adult, about the Underground Railroad, were you a part of it? And I can still remember the look on his face as he thought about it for a moment. And then he started to share a lot of the stories I share about Fort Erie with you today. And I have to tell you, I was quite upset that Fort Erie didn't want to hear the stories because they were oral. And I used to say, well, that's fine, I'll write a book. And I haven't been able to write the book, but I've been able to share these stories that he shared with me and my mother, with so many from around the world. And one of the stories he shared with me was about our ancestors escaped from Kentucky. There were two brothers and their 9-year-old sister. And the three of them, whether they were with a group of people or part of the Underground Railroad, he didn't know all those other details. But this is what he was able to share, that at some point in their journey, the three of them had fallen asleep. But something woke the boys up, whether it was a hound dog or bounty hunters or wild animals, don't know. But the boys took off like a shot. And they got a quarter of a mile away when they realized they'd left that baby sister sleeping in a log. Yeah, they could have said, well, what we going to do? We can't go back, get her, we get caught. No, I come from a family where they went back and got that baby sister and arrived safely in Fort Erie in 1851. I'm so proud that that's part of my DNA. And that's something why telling this history to our kids is so important, because they need to know that kind of courage. I wish I had known that story when I was younger. It wasn't easy growing up in Fort Erie as the only Black kid at times in my school. And I'll share that with you. It was not. And it took a long time for me to feel comfortable in this skin. And I can tell you, I am very comfortable in my skin. I'm very comfortable with who I am and where I came from. But I think the journey could have been made easier if I had known that background and stories of my family and others, because we do come from a great race. We have no reason to ever put our heads down. And that's what I like to tell the kids. So anyway, excuse me, moving on to the next slide. Another story I like to share is when people would come off of the boat. There's a controversy about a house in Fort Erie called Birdie Hall. And when I asked Uncle Kid about it, he knew nothing about it ever being used as a safe house. Some people will differ today, although I argued with Niagara Parks Commission, who owned the house for 10 years, to take the signage down. They finally did, because there was absolutely no proof that it ever was used as a safe house. And what really made, and at first I thought, well, just because my family didn't use it doesn't mean it wasn't a safe house. But as time went on, it seemed more impractical that that would ever happen. And the reason for that is that when you came off the ferry boat, right there at the river picture, right kitty corner to it was a black settlement. And that's where many people, a settlement of 200, lived at one point in time. I grew up in that area. There were still some of my ancestors and relatives there when I was born, and I lived there until the 70s, I believe. And it was known when I grew up as Birdie Hill, but there was a time when it was called the N Hill, and I don't mean Negro, but that's where people would live. So it makes sense. Remember, these people that were freedom seekers, these new refugees had been, why would they trust to go into a white man's house? Going into a white man's house was never very comfortable for them when they were in the US. So why would they go into a white man's house when they could go across the street and be with people who looked like them? My family, that's exactly what they did. And all they did was change their name at the time. So we changed our name for a while and we just blended right into that neighborhood. With regards to the street, there was a woman that was the chief trustee of the church there. Of course, there was a BME church, British Methodist Episcopal Church in Fort Erie at that time, and she was the chief trustee. And there was also a man by the name of William John Chandler who lived, um, who also ended up living on that street. He was from London, Ontario. And when Abraham Lincoln freed blacks during the as a result of the Civil War, during the Civil War, that meant black people could fight in the Civil War. And blacks and whites from Canada chose to fight in the Civil War, both on the Union and Confederate side. William John left London, Ontario, and fought on the Union side. He was injured in battle in Florida and did recover from that injury, but had to have his arm amputated. He only made it back as far as Fort Erie because he met the lovely Lavinia Taylor, chief trustee of that British Methodist Episcopal Church. When they were naming the streets of this black community in Fort Erie, they put her name on the street that she lived on. And I'm so proud to tell you that I just shared the story of my great grandfather, who was free black born Canadian, and my great grandma, who was the chief trustee of the BME church. That is the Lavinia Street is where they lived, and that's where I also lived. And then my great grandma and my great grandpa. Sorry for my words getting messed up a little. And last April, I was so thrilled. Wilma Morrison, one of the last things she did was that she gathered up her black military history and approached the Niagara Military Museum in Niagara Falls, run by the Doherty family, Jim and Kathy Doherty. And I'm so grateful to them because the exhibit is now at the Canada War Museum in Ottawa. What a thrill. You can't imagine when you've grown up feeling fairly invisible to now have one of your ancestors on exhibit in the nation's capital museum. Now it's called Community at War, and it's made up of all of these black soldiers from various wars. You know, we fought in all these wars, and we don't always get an opportunity to. We're not always recognized. I'm hoping, and apparently they're going to make this a travel exhibit. You go into the U.S. and their history would have blacks and whites together. In Canada, we have a tendency to have our own separate exhibit. Which is fine as well. At least we're being recognized, but it'd be really great if we were all integrated as a part of that's what I would like to hopefully see someday, is that our history be amalgamated and blended together. But for now, this is great. I was so excited. I was there in April to see it. And then I was fortunate to go back in August with a group of 40 some odd from San Francisco and was able to proudly show off my great grandpa. And that picture of him is at the beginning of the exhibit. So right as you go into the exhibit at the Canada War Museum, you'll see him there. And then I'm also blessed to have another relative who fought in World War I. There's been a lot of talk about the number 2 Battalion in Nova Scotia. Well, this gentleman, John Bright, was one of the others that participated in the war in World War One, but were not a part of that battalion. John Bright was obviously an exceptional human being because they weren't accepting people into the war that readily. Canadians were not doing that because they thought it might be uncomfortable for the whites to have black people in their troops, so they weren't being accepted. But sometimes, if there was a commanding officer that felt comfortable, you were accommodated. And that's what happened with John Bright. He was first brought in to protect the Welland Canal. And then he went on to London, England, where he was injured by fallen rubble, cracked and broke his ribs, convalesced for a year, but didn't come back to Canada. He went on to France and fought in a battle there. And he actually did die over there and is buried in France, but is only one of 6 that were given a Medal of Courage. They said he always led from the front. And he and I share some of the same DNA. I'm so proud. I attended an event in Toronto last year where a lot of people did not wear the poppy. And I questioned some of them as to why they didn't. And they brought up the story of Don Cherry and his comments about if you're not from this country, you should be wearing a poppy. And, it's like, yeah, but if you know Don Cherry, what the heck? You know what I mean? I understand the offense. Of course, I understand. But so I told this person, I said, so now let me tell you about this black man who fought in World War One. And I told the story and I said, hopefully next year for Remembrance Day, you'll wear that poppy and remember my ancestral cousin. His name's John Bright. The exhibit has been extended at the Canada War Museum. So if you're heading into Ottawa this summer, it's there until September. And then, of course, in August, I'll start bothering them again to see if they'll extend it or to see if the traveling exhibit will be ready to travel the country. Now, I told you that my Uncle Kit was the one who shared the stories I share with you today. And if it wasn't for him one day blurting this out to my mother and I, the world would not know about this cemetery. When Uncle Kit would tell us the stories of his life, of our history, it wasn't like we had Hallmark card moments sitting by a fireplace. It wasn't like that at all. He would just blurt something out. And he was in his 80s at the time, and I can tell you there was nothing wrong with that man's mind. That wasn't what killed him. And he never had any dementia whatsoever. And one day he just said, there's that colored cemetery up there off Richmount Road. We went, what? There's that colored cemetery off Richmount Road. So I said to Uncle Kit, I said, come on, Uncle Kit, take Mama and I out there. I drove, he directed, and we got right there. But before we even got there, we're traveling down Richmount Road, and he pointed to a grove of trees, and he said, Uncle Tom lived there. And I'm thinking, yeah, whatever. It's just a grove of trees. Well, every single thing that my Uncle Kit ever told me has been proven true. I have a letter that I received not too long ago from the church that's on that road. It's the St. John's Anglican Church, built in 1840, and they were there to help people, black people in the community, because that was part of Little Africa in that area. And so the people from the Anglican Church were helpful in assisting these black refugees. And in the letter that I received from one of the parishioners from the church, it stated right in the letter that Josiah Henson lived next door to the church. So even a detail like that, my Uncle Kit was bang on. And I couldn't believe it. But I'm so happy that I did approach him and that he did share the stories he shared, because there's so much history that wouldn't be told. And sadly, there's still so much more that could have been told had I taken more of an initiative, which I feel badly about. But if those in authority would have been more open to oral histories, but they weren't open to them at that time. But we take what we have and hope we can find more. And there's more and more being unfolded every day, it seems. So anyway, he called it the Colored Cemetery. And a few months later, he gave an interview to the Fort Erie paper. And they referred to, they said allegedly that there were black people buried there. But it also brought to the forefront that there was a cemetery out off of Ridgemount Road. And so they started to take care of it in perpetuity. And what happened is a family by the name of Sisler owned the property. And if you're ever out there, they've cut out a piece of, it's a piece of cutout. from the property. And Fort Erie did their research, didn't talk to us about it, but they did their research and recorded it as a segregated cemetery, which wasn't true, but I never bothered to tell them because then they would have asked me to correct it. But Uncle Kit at the time had told us it was the site of War of 1812 vets. And so that means it wasn't segregated by race. I'm deducing, critical thinking applied, that it was probably segregated because of religion. The only church that still exists, or that I know there was another one, a black church in the area, but nowhere to bury their dead. So the Sisler family loaned out the area for anyone who needed to bury their dead, but a large majority of the people would be black. And when the paper called it allegedly, that made me a little upset. But because when you see this stone here, that stone is my mother and I and my Uncle Kit. All the other stones in the background that you'll see there are all flat. This one was not flat. And lo and behold, it's our ancestors. Remember, I talked to you about the two brothers, Jack and Sylvester. I'm a direct descendant of Jack, and Sylvester was the other brother. And it's Sylvester and some of his family members that are buried on this site. Now, last summer, I had a tourism colleague that's well traveled around the world come on my tour. And he looked at the stone and he said, you know, this stone in Scotland would be reserved for the preacher, and it would be at the front of a cemetery, and it would have Holy Bible on the top of the stone. Well, sometimes on this stone you can see Holy Bible and sometimes you can't. It is located at the front of the cemetery. And this was the exciting news that I found out last year, but still need to do some more work on. There was apparently a black church in Little Africa, and my ancestor may have very well have been the preacher. I don't know for sure, but that's the next step of research when I'm allowed to do research. If I had my life to do over again, I'd get a PhD in this stuff and just do research because it's so phenomenal and there's so much to unearth. But anyway, very proud. But not knowing, but when we first stopped at that stone many years ago, my mother, Uncle Kit, myself, what was really interesting to us, which was a little bit of a Twilight Zone moment, is there's an infant baby there whose name was Essie. My mother called me, my name's Lezlie. My mother called me Essie all my life. And she didn't know why, she just did. And there's this baby ancestor of ours named Essie. It was a little bit of Twilight Zone, if you know what I mean. Do, 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 do. But anyway, I'm very proud, and stay tuned. I hope to be able to unearth that information about Reverend Sylvester Bright one of these days. Another site in Fort Erie, and as far as I'm going to get on this talk, will only be Fort Erie. Maybe I could come back again and do some other sites that I also include in the tour. Oh, you'll come down on the tour and visit them in person. But this site is really important. I didn't know about this site for the longest time, and a lot of people didn't. There was, after the Civil War, the United States came out with their segregation laws and their Jim Crow laws, and Booker T. Washington, who upon his freedom went to school and told black folks, never mind politics, just get a skill for yourself and just live your lives and don't worry about the white man's world, just, do your own thing. And that wasn't accepted by everyone. W.E.B. Du Bois, first black man to achieve a PhD from Harvard. And I love to emphasize that. Can you imagine? It's hard enough to do your dissertation regular, let alone to present it with an argument that also will back up your color. Not only did W.E.B. Du Bois do it at Harvard, but many did it all over the United States. Education was number one, still is, for people to move forward. So W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folks. And he said in it, I don't want these people to just be Negroes. And he used that word Negroes that we're not supposed to use anymore, but I'll use it. I want them to be Americans. All the rights that Americans have, he wanted for his folks as well. So he gathered up a bunch of people who were blacks, whites, men, women, who were all interested in what W.E.B. Du Bois had to say. And they came to Mary Talbert's house, president of the Negro Women's Council. And the thing that's ironic, in 1905, that we need to think about, Mary Talbert lived in Buffalo on Michigan Avenue. She was recognized just recently in Buffalo during Women's History Month. And great woman. She was part of the anti-lynching committee. She ran this National Negro Women's Council. And the other thing, she hosted 29 men in her house overnight. Now, she had one of those old 3-story houses, if you've ever been to Buffalo, they're quite predominant throughout the city. And in those days, you didn't have to have an ensuite bath for all of your guests. A piece of floor would be fine. If there was carpet on the floor, that was a suite. So these men stayed at her house. And like I tell the kids, once it's on the internet, it stays there forever, which can be misleading. So you've got to be really careful when you take stuff off the internet, because it said there that, and it's still there to say that they couldn't get a room in Buffalo, so they had to come to Fort Erie. They wanted to come to Fort Erie because in 1885, men from Buffalo, Lake Erie has a beautiful shoreline, and many, many cottages would go up. Just as in Toronto, they have Muskoka. People from Buffalo came to Fort Erie and built these cottages along Lake Erie. But in those days, there wasn't any income tax being collected. So people doing things was also a big deal, and asking people to invest and hire people. So that would be on both sides of the border. The border was very easy to deal with at that time. So they built this amusement park. It was called Buffalo's $2 million playground. And it had a roller coaster on property. That oval that you see had a stadium for 3,500 people. It had the largest outdoor pool in the lake. It had a 3-story dance hall. And I'll show you the ruins of that dance hall right here. That's what's left of it, but it was quite large. So they wanted to come here. And at the end of their, and so they stayed in Fort Erie at the Erie Beach Hotel. And at the end, they came up with a set of resolutions about how were they going to get these Negroes to become full-fledged Americans. They decided a civil rights organization was required. And I'm so proud that that Civil Rights Foundation that started as a concept in Fort Erie, Ontario, Canada, ended up being the NAACP, which had its first meeting in New York City in 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And I'm so proud. So as Canadians, we can take pride in that the civil rights movement actually started here in Canada. And I'm going to end on that note, but I finish with my Uncle Kit's story. My Uncle Kit, my grandmother's brother, there were 13 children in that family. And there was Aunt Marg and Uncle Kit left, both of them in their 90s. And Aunt Marg passed one night. I went to see Uncle Kit the next morning to tell him the bad news. And I said, Uncle Kit, I have some bad news for you this morning. He said, you do? What is? I said, well, Aunt Marg passed last night. And I was surprised what he said. Now that I'm older, I shouldn't have been, but at that time I was still pretty young, so I was surprised. And he said, she did. Poor thing, what happened to her? I was shocked because she's in her 90s. I didn't think it required explanation. But I said, well, Uncle Kit, I guess she just gave up. Uncle Kit became very upset with the words I used, and he said, what do you mean she gave up? You don't give up and keep going till you can't go no more. He sadly passed away a few months later. But when I started to do these tours in 2004, that conversation came back to hit me upside the head, because that's who I am the legacy of. That's who we Black folks here are a legacy of. A group of people who never gave up. No matter what the obstacle was, we never gave up. Josiah Henson and everything he dealt with. My family and everything they dealt with. And I'm sure there's people that will watch this that could tell their stories as well. We come from a fine race of people, and we still have many challenges ahead. We're not done yet, but we are the ones that can rise above and show people how it's done. So I thank you very, very much for taking the time to listen to me today, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Lezlie, and especially because you're under the weather. I so appreciate your commitment to doing this presentation. And it sounds like we're going to have a Celebrating Black Canadian History Part 2 presentation in the future. So because you have so much content to share. So I will open it up if anyone has questions. Anyone
Oh
have
my
a question?
goodness. I couldn't see the screen before. So Stephen and I go way back.
Stephen is
Happy belated birthday, Stephen.
Oh, thanks, Leslie. Yeah, that
Stephen
was
is
Mr.
really
Pete.
good. I really enjoyed that so much.
And you've been on the tour.
Yes, yes, I want to do it again. I've been recommending it to all my friends as well.
Oh, thank you. Well, I have to get up to see you. And Peter, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Good.
Peter's been an awesome contributor to this history. I applaud you for everything you do too. So I'm
One thing,
glad you guys
yes.
liked it.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention is that they don't give enough credit to Josiah Henson's wife because,
Oh,
like, he didn't escape. The family escaped.
right.
They never mentioned the women.
Yeah, yeah.
She
But
was taking care of them the whole way, and she walked the whole way with him and the kids.
yeah,
That's what I always say about Frederick Douglass's wife Annie. He
Yeah,
wasn't home. She was shipping those people through.
that's right.
You know, we're the silent ones, you know. We just
Oh yeah.
humbly do our job.
I
One thing,
just
one thing I want to mention that for people in the Amherstburg area, um, the museum is doing a presentation with the bookstore with Kai Thomas about his book called In the Upper Country,
Oh,
which the impetus for the book was the story, John Daddy Hall's story. So it involves the history of Indigenous people and Black people and Europeans in Ontario and North America in general. So yeah, so that'll be
cool.
interesting. I helped him work on that book. So
Are
it,
you
yeah.
going to be at the thing up in Collingwood, Peter?
when
Is it
is that?
Collingwood or Owen Sound?
The,
At the family, I can't remember.
oh, yeah, the Emancipation Picnic.
Yeah, you not the
I,
picnic. Some award, something in May or June or something.
oh no, I
I'll
don't know about that yet. So
I'll send you an email.
okay.
And if I do that, I promise Stephen I will stop by.
yes, please do. I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay.
I'm really sorry, but I got to run. I got another meeting coming up at 3
Oh, well,
o'clock.
thank you so
But I
much.
enjoyed
Say
that
hi to
so much.
Noreen for me and the
I
girls.
will. I will.
All
You
right.
take good care. Get well
Okay.
soon, eh?
Thank you. I will. Great to
Okay.
see you, Stephen. That was so cool. Let me
And
go back.
for everyone listening, the when Peter mentioned the event with Kai Thomas, that's with the River Bookshop in Amherstburg. So for
Okay.
anyone interested in that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
May 17th. May
Excellent.
7th. Yeah.
Yes. And for anyone listening or watching, I've included the link if you wanted to book a tour or learn more from Niagara Bound Tours and book with Lezlie. And for anyone listening, it's www.niagaraboundtours.com. And if you wanted to reach out to Lezlie, she's on Facebook as well. And she's a huge supporter of the museum. So we're very grateful to her. And Lezlie, I did have a question. If you could just talk about the tour itself. Do people book through your website?
I'd rather they not do that. I prefer they contact me direct because it's always different things, the
Okay.
amount of people and everything. When COVID happened, I developed a car caravan tour. I felt sorry for parents who had these kids at home all the time. So I came up with a tour where you follow me from outdoor site to outdoor site in your own vehicle. Now that we can have people in vehicles, from 2 to 4 people can ride with me as a private tour. I rent vehicles, which is tough to do these days, but we're getting there. And so I can do, I tell people I do tours for 2 to a bus load. I have done 2 buses, but I prefer 1 bus. And we hit the sites in Fort Erie, sites in St. Catharines. Sometimes we'll tag on Niagara on the Lake. Sometimes we'll drive right by the falls because I have a story from the US side that I like to share. Just depends on the time of year and how much time people have. but the tours can normally take from 4 to 5 hours and more if we stop for lunch, if we stop at a winery after. I'm happy to add other things onto it as well. It's your day. So, and I've greeted people from all over the world. I was supposed to have an Amman, I believe, from Turkey, but because of the earthquake, he had to cancel. So even someone from Turkey was interested in learning about this Black history. So it's not just a niche market, as the tourism industry sometimes likes to call it. It's a history that is of interest to many, many people, and I'm happy to share it.
Wow, and you answered my next question about having some from Turkey wanting to come for your tour. I was going to ask, where are people coming from to learn more from you?
A lot of people come out of Maryland, believe it or not, but they also come from all over the United States. I just had Evander Holyfield's brother on tour. I don't know what day was that, maybe Monday, I think it was. Yeah, Monday. And they were from Detroit, but Florida, Texas, Toronto sometimes. I'm hosting some people from Toronto next week, and I'm hosting some people from Chicago next week, and hosting some people from St. Catharines. People come from all over. Now it's a little different now because tourism's still in crisis mode as far as transportation and so on is concerned. So it's still a little bit of a challenge, but we're getting there. And I'm really proud. I've hosted people from South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Paris, England, Taiwan. So it really has a broad appeal. It really does, and I'm proud. One of the things I'm working on is I'm establishing tours that have a Canada-US connection. And I've been working with a colleague in Maryland and colleagues in Delaware, Philadelphia, New York State with my Underground Railroad Consortium group. We're putting together a Harriet Tubman Plus tour that'll start in Maryland and come into Canada. One moment. And once we finish that tour, we're going to start working. And I was meeting with some people last week in Birmingham. We're going to start doing a Civil Rights Plus tour. And we have some other ones in line that we're going to be working on as well. So there's going to be tours moving forward that have a US-Canadian connection historically. And not just Underground Railroad, but other things of interest as well. But always to include Black history, of course.
That sounds
Maybe do a
amazing.
baseball one because of Robinson. What's his name? You know, black guy, black
Jackie
baseball
Robinson?
player.
Jackie Robinson?
Pardon?
Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. I wanted to call him Tom Robinson, but Jackie Robinson because he played in Montreal. So there's that connection too. So things like that. We're working on things that being a little more creative to create more of that bond. And the National Park Service, and it's interesting, we know we're on the right track because I started this with the Underground Railroad Consortium a few years ago, the association partnership between Canada and the US. And right now, Parks Canada is partnering with the National Park Service, which is fantastic. The National Park Service is just, what they've been able to do with their sites is just amazing. They're a resource to me constantly, and I enjoy working with them too. They're just awesome. So there's all kinds of great stuff going on with Black history too between the two countries.
Excellent. And I look forward to hearing more about the tour you want to have from Maryland to your area. That sounds fascinating. So
It is, and
yes.
it's been great. I was in Maryland and Washington over U.S. Thanksgiving. And then the end of March, I was in Delaware, Pennsylvania, which included Philadelphia, the end of March. So it's coming along. It's a lot of work, but we'll get her done. It's fun. I love it.
And we appreciate so much all of the work that you put into your tours. And thank you again so much for being our guest speaker today. I learned so much, and I know our audience did as well too. And because it's recorded and we're going to upload it to our Facebook, YouTube, and website, even more people are going to learn about this history. So thank you again so much, Lezlie. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, if you wanted to book with Lezlie, you can reach out to her. There's more information on her website, niagaraboundtours.ca, is it?
No, .com.
.com,
Or they can call
niagaraboundtours.com.
me. I still enjoy talking to people.
Okay,
So
if
you
you
can
wanted
always
to
call
provide
me.
that phone number now, you
The
can,
phone number
or
is 905-685-5375.
excellent.
905-685-5375. No crank calls though.
Again, thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you
Thank
everyone
you.
for joining us today. And I think we
Thank
will end it there. So thank you again.
thank you. Bye, Peter. Good to see you again. Thanks, Lorraine.